welcome to the Scroll Sanity podcast. I'm your co-host, Nick DiBella, and I am here with the creator of the Scroll Sanity newsletter on Substack, Carmella Guiol. Carmella, good morning.
Good morning, Nick.
Thank you so much for joining me on this adventure as we explore the world of digital minimalism on the Scroll Sanity podcast. Carmella, as the creator of the Scroll Sanity newsletter on Substack and as a digital health expert, I would love to talk to you first and foremost about what was the impetus for you to get into the world of digital minimalism, and what makes you the right person to talk about this new endeavor?
Sure. I'm super excited also because I just love talking to people about their relationship to technology. It's something that we all have to navigate every day. And I think as a whole, we're all struggling with that. And I think for me, this kind of started back when I was a kid because my dad was one of those early adopters. We were the first people that I knew to have a desktop computer, to have dial-up internet, to have a cell phone. My dad had a cell phone when it was in a briefcase about the size of a telephone book. And it was amazing. Like we would just park outside the house and like call the house, from a handheld phone and just be like, whoa. So my dad was a huge fan of technology, but he also was very, very aware of the power of technology. And so even though he was an early adopter, he tightly managed the way that my sister and I would interact with these technologies. I think he could understand their true power before most people could. And I fought him on these restrictions a lot when I was a teenager. But over the years, I've started to see the wisdom in his ways. And I've started to adopt a lot of his own thinking around technology. Like, yes, it's a wonderful tool, but also it's super powerful, and we do have to be aware of how we're using it.
It's amazing because, you and I met on using technology. So again, the power of technology is there. We met on the platform Reddit because we were both looking into moving away from the smartphone, right? We both were iPhone users, and we started looking at the technology light phone, which is what people call a dumb phone or a feature phone. I myself am a recovering tech addict, self-admitted. I've owned every gadget. I tell people all the time, if it connects to Wi-Fi and lights up, I've probably owned it at some point. But I think I realized over the last few years, I'm a dad now. I have a 15-month-old daughter, and my time is more precious than it ever has been. And I think I've realized over time that a lot of the technologies that are sold to us as convenience and ways to save time, ways to maximize efficiency, they have a cost associated with them. And that cost is typically our time and attention. And so while I'm still a person who loves technology and use it all the time in my work as a creative professional, I realized that in my personal life, I didn't have to be so beholden to the technology that is around me. And so as you and I will talk about, we both made the jump to the light phone, a feature phone, moving away from the smartphone. For me entirely, I think you and I have a little bit different approaches to this. I know you still might have an iPhone in your life. We'll talk about that a little bit in a few minutes. But for myself, I'm now entirely on a quote unquote dumb phone. I'm using the light phone as my only communication device day to day. And it's had massive improvements for me, things that I call flows, but it's also had some challenges, what I've called frictions, which we'll talk about as well. But before we jump into that, I wanted to talk about both the Scroll Sanity newsletter on Substack and this podcast, and ask you, as the creator of that newsletter and now co-creator of this podcast, where did the name Scroll Sanity come from, and why are we calling it Scroll Sanity?
Well, we exist in a digital world, and I think these digital devices and the internet are just a fact of life. They're tools that help us with day-to-day tasks like paying our electricity bill or playing music. But I also think that these tools have hijacked our lives. So for me, the name Scroll Sanity is about how do we use these technologies while also maintaining our sanity. So we can't be complete Luddites and function in today's modern world. So how do we function with these technologies while not letting those technologies use us? How can we use them as a tool?
So Carmella, as I mentioned, we're both light phone users now. We've made the switch to the quote dumb phone or feature phones. I think for some similar reasons, some for maybe different reasons. I'm curious, what initially prompted you to make the switch to the quote unquote feature phone from the iPhone?
Well, for the longest time, I've been doing different experiments with technology. So, for example, I had a flip phone until 2017. So I
Wow.
held off as long as possible. And then the year that I got a smartphone, I did a year-long social media sabbatical. So I'm kind of always trying to hack my technology use, my relationship to technology. And I'm also a mother. I have two small kids, 3 and 2 years old. And I was starting to get very uncomfortable with my relationship to my smartphone. I didn't like the example that I was setting for my kids. I
Mm,
also didn't like how much time and attention I was giving to this inanimate object. And I thought, my kids are kind of having to fight my phone for my attention.
wow.
And I didn't like the way that I felt. And I felt like I was sort of becoming spiritually sick because I started to notice that I couldn't be alone with myself. I felt more agitated and anxious than ever. I had less patience with my kids. And in talking to people about technology, I met somebody who had a light phone. He was also a dad. And so he kind of planted the seed for me in terms of that specific technology. But I think I still had a lot of like, no, I can't because of this, because of that, making a lot of excuses. So my husband was kind of pleading with me to put away my phone and pointing
Mm,
out how often I would disappear into my phone. And I knew he was right, even though I fought him on it, but I didn't like what I saw, and I knew that my phone wasn't as important and as urgent as I thought. So making the switch, I was right around the new year. I just kind of on an impulse decided to take the plunge and buy the light phone. I think it was maybe the start of the new year that just kind of gave me that energy to say, you know what, I'm going to stop making excuses and I'm just going to do it.
well, it's so interesting to hear you say the phrase, getting lost in your phone, as your husband put it, because I think that's something I noticed was happening to me, and I'm sure you see it as well when you're with other folks who have a smartphone. It can happen, right? They pick up their phone maybe mid conversation with you in person to check something or respond to a message, and they kind of trail off in their conversation. Their attention is divided, and ultimately maybe they end up on another app or they end up multitasking. And
Sure.
certainly I was a victim to that as well. As I mentioned, am definitely a recovering gadget addict. I have done a massive purge of all the technology I've amassed over the years, and the light phone and yes, my iPad are kind of the two things I have left, and they seem to be enough for me. And it's so interesting to hear you mention this idea that there's this urgency around needing the phone because it's this lifeline to all of these access points in our life, whether it's work email or in my case, the baby monitor was a smartphone app, right? And so
Mhm.
I had all these rationales in my mind as to why I couldn't get rid of my phone. And
Exactly.
then I said, well, let me just try it. I said I would do it for 30 days. And what's great about the light phone and the light phone community that is on Reddit is, folks who it doesn't work out for, they have a weekly sale thread. You can just say, you know what, this wasn't for me. Does anyone else want to buy this for me at a discount? So I thought,
Mhm.
what's the harm in making this purchase? Yes, it's I think $299 to start. So for some folks that might be prohibitive, but for me it was enough to say, let me experiment with this. It's a worthy investment. And I noticed, I think within the first 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks, that it was a misnomer. This idea that I couldn't be without a smartphone, because once I removed it from my life, nothing really changed.
Yeah.
And you mentioned in your rationale that you were feeling more anxious than ever. And I know I was too. I mean, certainly through the COVID-19 pandemic, as the state of the world and the state of US politics gets more fraught, I was doom
Sure.
scrolling more than ever. And it was certainly making me a more anxious, less happy person, and certainly less
Mhm.
mindful in my daily life. And so I think right around the same time as you, I think it was just at the tail end of December, I decided to gift myself the light phone with candidly the intention of only keeping it for maybe 30 days. And I knew
Mhm.
before the 30 days was up that I would not be going back. And I actually sold my iPhone before the 30 days was up. And so now I live
Nice.
the the light phone only life, and so far so good. As I said, we'll talk a little bit about some of the flows and frictions that have come with this switch, but
Mhm.
by and large, it's been a big change for me, and a positive one.
Yeah, same here. I think at this point I'm like 6 weeks into my light phone existence, and I almost wanna say, like, it's easy, but I know that it wasn't easy in the beginning, but at this point, like, 6 weeks in, it feels like a pretty natural thing now. But I have been noticing how often my brain still has that impulse to check the phone, to
Right.
grab it, the smartphone, which was that dopamine hit for so many years. and now I don't have it. And so now I'm even more aware of like that addictive relationship that I had with it. So it's still something that I'm working through, but it has not been as hard of a transition as I thought.
Yeah, it's so interesting to hear you say that. I found myself, if I'm waiting in line or I'm standing around, I will pull out my light phone with that same impulse. And
Yeah.
then, the beautiful thing about the phone is, yeah, it has some features. You can do podcasts and navigation and calculator and that kind of thing. But by and large, you can't do a whole lot with it. And so
Yeah.
when you take it out of your pocket to pacify yourself, quite frankly, to pass the
Right.
time so you're not alone with your thoughts, there's not a whole lot you can do. And so it does, as you said, bring into sharp relief that idea that, oh wow, this is impulse. I am being driven by compulsion, not by control. And so yeah, that's always a really powerful reminder to me that I'm making the right decision.
Yes, absolutely. And I know that for you, you sold your smartphone and I haven't. I still have my iPhone. I'm probably interacting with my iPhone about once a day at this point. I decided to keep my iPhone as a camera
Mm-hmm.
and I don't carry it on my person all the time. Like my son, is going to a birthday party. I'll take it with me to take photos at like special events. I don't want to have it on me all the time. And I decided to do that because I just didn't my husband actually bought me a camera and I was like, I'm not really excited about carrying around now like a big camera and then sort of the friction of sharing those photos because I do still want to share photos with family of my kids.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just like, you know what? This meets my need of taking photos and sharing them easily. And of course, I could do that with another digital camera, but it's just a little bit more, time consuming. And so I decided to keep the iPhone for that reason. And I keep it in a drawer and tucked away and I have keep it off. But it still has because I have Wi-Fi at home. So at home it could still, connect. But I did certain things like I just got rid of a lot of apps. I got
Mm.
rid of the internet browser.
Wow.
So I think that makes a big difference because now if I do have it, I can't just go into the browser and let's say like Google something random or even go to Facebook in the browser or because a lot of times I would delete apps, but then I would still use the browser to access
Oh,
them, like
interesting. Right. The
Instagram and
hack.
stuff.
Yeah, the workaround.
Yeah. And so now the iPhone doesn't have a browser anymore. So I just kind of use it for the bare minimum stuff.
That's
Yeah.
interesting. For myself, I actually, because I am a gadget addict, what's the one kind of nice thing about making the switch to the light phone is that it's allowed me to re-engage with other aspects of technology that I haven't needed. And one of those is a digital camera. The
Mhm.
fact that I no longer have a camera on my phone meant I needed some sort of photo taking device. And as a creative professional, I come from the world of photo and video. I got to
Mhm.
re-engage with that world and the communities that are out there, certainly on social media, but just in friendships that I have, re-engaging with friends that are photographers and say, hey, what's the right
Yeah.
device for me right now? And some of those frictions that we'll talk about are similar to what you're describing, which is now when I want to take photos, I have to take out a device, turn it on, give it a few seconds to boot up, snap the
Mhm.
photos, and then I have to download them to the iPad to
Yeah.
share them with family. So there's all of these steps that are now there that weren't before.
Mhm.
And the way that I am looking at them is that it does allow for more intentionalism. I noticed by and large we were taking significantly less photos of my daughter.
Yes.
I think our iCloud photo storage has like thousands of photos from her first
Yes.
year of life, which is I think a lot of new parents fall into that trap. But now
Mhm.
I'm taking maybe 5 or 6 a day as opposed to literally 50 to 100. And
Yeah.
so we're cherry picking the right moments, and then when I go through to share them, I'm a little more scrutinous about which ones actually go into the album instead of just uploading all. Right. So
Yeah.
there's a mindfulness that can come with that. It's certainly not as convenient. I'm the first to admit that. But it does require me to sit down and be a lot more intentional with my usage. So so
Yeah.
far, I've been pretty happy with that.
Taking photographs of my kids was such a huge part of my life for since they've been born, and I mean, every single day, all the time, and so I was a little concerned about making that change, and I go days, many days in a row without taking a single photo of my kid,
Hmm.
and it doesn't bother me. Like, it hasn't like, that's what I mean when it hasn't been a horrible thing. I honestly, I'm, like, surprised at how little I, like, miss that now that I just don't have the option. It's kind of like, well, and like I said, I can use my husband's phone, his smartphone, to take photos if we're
Mm,
together, which I will do sometimes. And I will take the phone, like I took it to my son's swimming class the other day because I knew he was going to be like taking the swimming test, and I videoed him and then, sent it to the family. So, for important events like that. But otherwise, it hasn't been a problem. And
yeah,
I heard a parent on Substack call it, I feel like a paparazzi. And that is definitely the vibe.
yeah. Well, I think there's this kind of unspoken social pressure for parents to catalog every moment of their children's lives and frankly share it with family who might be, further away or that
Yeah.
type of thing. And, personally, my wife and I, we don't share pictures of our daughter's face on social media just
Yeah.
because we want her to be able to make the choice when she wants to do that. And she's not old enough to make those choices for herself yet. But even just sharing them with family, it did become like, do we need to capture every moment of every meal? And now there are times where I'll reach for my
Right.
phone to take a photo and I don't have it, and my wife will do, and I will do this kind of funny thing where we'll mimic a camera click just with our hands, and
Yes.
this idea of like taking a mental photo, right? Being
Yes.
in the moment and just let's just remember this moment. We don't need to capture the photo because as much as God, I love my daughter more than anything, but I'll be honest. I haven't looked at those 2,000 photos we've uploaded.
Exactly.
I maybe I've looked
Exactly.
at 70 of them, but the other, 920 haven't
Yes.
gotten any love, right? So were they necessary?
Yes, and it makes it even harder to enjoy them when you have so many. Like, I like to put together photo books, and honestly, it's such a chore just like slogging through the thousands of photos that I have to choose the best ones. And I'm like, it doesn't make me want to do it. And and I really avoid it. And because there's just so many.
Right.
So I'm looking forward to 2024 having less photos of my kids.
It's funny to hear it like that, but I think
Yeah.
it actually makes a lot of sense. I wanted to throw it to you to say, what can listeners expect as we move forward? Yeah, in this podcast, we're gonna, you and I have talked about doing this twice monthly, keeping folks updated on our journey through this world of digital minimalism with our new feature phones. But it's not; those aren't the only things we'll be talking about. What else can folks expect, Carmella, as we get going on the Scroll Sanity podcast?
Yeah, well, like I said, I love talking to people about their relationship to technology. So I think that's one of the things I'm super excited about with this podcast because we're going to be interviewing experts and also just other folks that are curious about digital minimalism, just like lay people who maybe have different hacks or relationships with their technology. So we'll be talking about digital minimalism like with each other and with our guests through our own lenses as parents, but also thinking about mental health and mindfulness and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I can't wait. I'm super excited. I know, given you've been at this longer than I have with the Scroll Sanity newsletter over on Substack, you've built a community of folks who are already in this world and frankly are further along on their journeys than we are, and have maybe tips, tricks, and insights as to the benefits and maybe drawbacks of diving into the world of digital minimalism. And certainly, we'll keep listeners up to date on our journeys with feature phones, all the good, the bad, and the ugly
Mhm.
of moving away from the smartphones we've been beholden to for so many years. I thought we could talk a little bit about the flows and frictions of our lives with the light phone. What's working with the light phone, what's not. For me, flows are the moments where not having a smartphone is improving our lives. And frictions are the moments where having a feature phone has maybe caused a problem, added stress to your life. And I know I've had a few of those. Right off the bat, I would say, in terms of flows for me, I'm definitely more mindful and I'm more present when I'm home. There was
Yeah.
definitely, even when I was taking photos of my daughter on
Yeah.
the smartphone, there was a lens between us. There was a glass between us. There was a device literally dividing our space. And now,
Hmm.
as nice as it was to have that access to a device, we're now much more present with each other. And frankly, she's a little over 1 now. She loves the smartphone. It lights up. She touches it.
Yeah.
It interacts with her. And so she would grab it out of my hand. She still does it with my wife's phone. And the ease of use for those things is a little spooky at how quickly she could
Right.
really get into that. And so I'm finding that when we're home, when we're sitting, the three of us are sitting down to dinner, or even if my wife and I are just having a movie night, I don't have a phone in my hand. I'm not side scrolling.
Exactly.
I'm not quote unquote multitasking.
Yeah.
And so that has made me feel much more rooted, planted in my life in a way that I don't think I was. And that to me makes even the hardest days with the light phone so worth it. And we already talked a little bit about this, but I would say I'm significantly less anxious than I was. And I don't necessarily consider myself a very anxious person, but I am a news junkie. And so I was really, really hooked on
Hmm.
doom scrolling all of the bad news. And frankly, with things like push notifications, I could have been doing something really enjoyable on my phone and then had, some sort of major disaster that happened in the world pop up on my screen and disrupt my flow,
Yeah.
disrupt my thoughts, and make me more anxious. And
Hmm.
so now that I've removed that from my life, it just doesn't happen. And yes, the terrible things that are still happening in the world are happening, but there's not a lot I can do about them in real time, and so I don't need them put in my face when I'm trying to help get my daughter to bed or whatever the case may be. So,
Hmm.
Carmilla, how about you? What flows have you found moving from an iPhone to a light phone?
Yeah, a lot of what you said. I think I have more joy in my life.
Wow.
I think that I'm able, because of being able to be more present with my kids, I'm enjoying them a lot more. And part of that is that I think I was using my smartphone as a soothing mechanism when
Mm.
things were hard with my kids. And like I have a 3-year old and 2-year old. So things are often very chaotic
Right.
in my house and two little boys. And I wasn't handling that well.
Mm.
I had a very, short fuse. I was using my phone to kind of, separate myself from what was going on around me. And now that I don't have that soothing mechanism, I'm having to learn how to regulate my emotions in a healthier way. And I'm able to learn that alongside my kids because they're also learning how to do that. And so being present has allowed me, I think, to be a better mother. And it's still really hard, and it's hard being in those tough moments, but breathing through them, taking deep breaths instead of like just turning to the phone, has helped me feel calmer. And I think doing less has allowed me to just have like more serenity in my life. I love being able to tell people like, I can't do that right now. Like, I can't search something, find out what time that restaurant opens, like whatever. I just can't. And I like being able to just like be like, no,
Right. The power of
and
no. Hearing you say you have more joy, you feel more serenity, and you feel like a better mother. I mean, those three things I think are things people are constantly searching for solutions to. And what's so interesting to me is that I think technology, there's a lot of marketing out there that tells us, oh, this new app is going to help you find more joy. You're going to be more mindful using this tool or this
right.
technology. And but there's still the technology. They're still anchoring you to that technology. And so it's interesting to
Exactly.
hear that the absence of it is what's actually made that come into fruition for you.
Yes. And every one of those apps, it's like a keyhole into the whole smartphone.
Right.
So it's like it could never just be that one mindfulness app because it's so easy to fall into everything else. And something I've been hearing people talk about a lot lately around social media, like quitting social media, is embodiment. And so, this constant need to document everything and then put it out into the world, it doesn't allow you to be in your body in
Mm.
these moments. And so that's something that I've been enjoying as well. And honestly, it's kind of amazing to feel like I just have more hours in the day.
Oh
Um,
yeah, especially as
I
a parent. I mean,
yes.
especially with two kids, I can't even imagine. Just with one, I could use 10 more hours every day. So I imagine you need 20 more.
But like the amount of hours that I was spending, just like every little moment that I had a free moment, it was just being sucked into the phone. And so like now those little moments might be spent like, I don't know, reading something or picking up my journal, or, I'm not losing myself. I'm not losing my time. And I mean, and this is something that we'll talk about on the podcast, but it's kind of like, what do we do with that time? And this is something like Cal Newport says, like, you cannot take away the smartphone or the internet or social media and you're going to leave a vacuum. So
Right.
I knew that from the beginning, like reading Cal Newport's book Digital Minimalism, like, okay, what am I going to be filling that time with, and how do I, because I don't have a lot of hobbies. I mean, I have two kids, like, so,
Right.
but it's like now I have a running list in my head of like, oh, you have 5 minutes, take a walk around the block. Or I've been writing more, like just journaling more or whatever, and I leave little things for myself around the house where it's like I've been picking up embroidery and
Cool.
I just like have it around, and maybe I'll just get like 2 stitches in or whatever. And I can't sit down and work on it for an hour, but it's like, okay, you want to do something with your hands right now? Like, why don't you create something just for the sake of creating, not for the sake of like being productive.
Right. And well, it's so interesting to hear you say that. It reminded me, as you mentioned, screen time. That was the real catalyst for me moving away from the iPhone. I looked at that they have the screen time checker as an app in the phone built in, and I checked it. And there was a week where I had 8 hours and 45 minutes a day as my
Oh
average
yeah.
on the phone. Now again, my baby monitor is on there. I use it for directions. I use it for podcasts. But even with all of that, that's a full work day, right? I mean, that's a
Right.
full day. And I was thinking to myself, what could I have done with that time? And so, yeah, $299 for the light phone is not pennies, right? That's a significant amount of money for really anybody.
Yeah, but
But it was
compared to a smartphone, it's a
right. A,
fraction of the
compared to a
price.
smartphone, and B, I said if it's going to get me even half of that time back, it's worth it. And so now I have the iPad. I still use that track screen time. It's more like 3 hours a day, and a lot of times I'm using that for work. Doing sketching for my creative projects and that kind of thing. So
Mhm.
it's definitely been a massive improvement in terms of that intentionalism and hobbies. And it's funny, you said, you might find you've had more time. What are you going to do with it? Well, we started a podcast, which I think is cool
Exactly.
because as a creative and communications professional, I've done podcasts and video series for other people for pay, right, as part of my job. And I've always said, oh, I'll do one myself someday,
Mhm.
but I quote unquote never had time. And then within 6 weeks of getting rid of a smartphone, I met you, and now we're doing it, right? So I think that
Yeah.
speaks to the power of that free time and what we can do with it. But with all of the great things that we've gained from removing the smartphones from our lives as much as we have, those flows, I've certainly had some frictions moving away from the smartphone, and I'm sure you have as well. For me, those moments that have where a feature phone has caused problems are the team at Lightphone is amazing, and they're not a sponsor. We're not getting anything from them. We both just happen to buy the phones ourselves. But I've had a couple issues with software or little bugs here and there, and they've been super responsive. They actually shipped me a new phone when they couldn't fix one of my issues free of charge. And so I'm really grateful to that. But they're not Apple. They don't have a 24-hour customer
Right.
service line. I can't walk into a store and get it solved. So from a technology and infrastructure standpoint,
Yeah.
there are definitely some frictions there. And then I think I mentioned to you off the podcast a week or so ago, I had a doctor's appointment at a new office I had not been to before. And I got in the car to get there and then realized I didn't know where I was going. And I
Right.
didn't have my smartphone to just put in the address and get there. I
Yeah.
use the Light Phone directions tool that's built in. It leaves a little bit to be desired from a functionality standpoint. It did help
Yeah.
me get there, but I had a moment of getting lost and taking a wrong turn. And it brought me back 15 years like that, like when we used to have
Yeah.
MapQuest directions and just figure out where we were going. So it wasn't the end of the world, but it definitely was a moment of, oh, right, without the smartphone, I can't just get where I'm going wherever I want to go. It removes some power, but I think there's power in getting a little lost and figuring out where you're
Yes.
going.
Mhm.
And then the last thing for me is, there's a little bit of fear of missing out. I've had folks reach out to me and say, oh, hey, we sent you that video or on that group message, or did you happen to see that thing on Instagram? And the answer is no, I haven't. And but
Yeah.
what I think is so interesting about that as well is maybe there's a moment of anxiety or fear of missing out, but temporarily it's gone within a few seconds, and then it washes away, right? None of the stuff on social media is permanent. It's all so fleeting that maybe I missed the
Mhm.
big trend this week, but there'll be another one in a few weeks, and then that'll be
Mhm.
gone. So while I'm quote unquote missing something, I don't know if it's that important.
Yeah.
But in terms of frictions for you, Carmella, where have
Yeah.
you run into issues having the smartphone significantly less in your life?
I'm gonna be annoying because I'm gonna say I love the frictions.
Wow. Okay. Cool.
Like, I mean, they're built into the design, right? So, like, an
Mm,
iPhone is completely seamless. Like, it interacts with you as if it can read your mind. And, you pick it up and it knows that you picked it can, it responds right away. And like I kind of wait for the light phone to do that. It's like, hello, I picked it up. Like,
right.
why aren't you, and it won't, respond to me right away. I have to, press a button. I think it's just like these frictions are the reason why I got, a dumb phone, and they are forcing me to be more intentional. I have to think about my day in advance.
Yeah.
And for example, I know that I'm going to be out and then I'm going to order a pizza at 4 p.m., but I'm leaving my house at 9 a.m. and I'm going to call the pizza from my drive, from swimming class and pick it up on my way home. Well, in the morning, I have to write down the number of the
Right.
pizza place and have it with me so that later on I can call them because I won't have any way from the road to figure that out. So it's like, every things like that. Like I have to print out my boarding pass to go to the airport.
Right.
So it's just forcing me to be more intentional. And also like texting is annoying. And I used to be, a huge, like I used to use swipe text and like,
Hmm.
and I would just have these long, texting back and forth, whatever. And now because it's so annoying, I'm like, do I really need to send this text?
Right.
I'm gonna just like text kind of like the bare minimum. And if I want to have a back and forth with a friend, like I'll call them and that will be easier. With the light phone, I love the voice to text.
Yep.
So at least I don't
Great
have to
feature.
actually be pressing these buttons. The voice to text feature works really well.
Yep.
I am bilingual and I do a lot of my texting in Spanish. Unfortunately, the voice to text does not work in Spanish.
Ah.
And so that I think has been the only like major friction for me that is really unsolvable kind of because, that's just not a feature that they offer. But that's okay. Like I just, have to type it out and I'll just make it very short. I'm still like checking my WhatsApp because I was using WhatsApp primarily as my texting platform because a lot of my family lives abroad. And so I kind of had to train people. Like that's another friction where I'm like, if you need a timely response from me, do not text me on WhatsApp anymore. I will not see that until the end of the day when I go to my laptop and I look at my WhatsApp. And so that's kind of been a bit of an issue because people will call me using WhatsApp and I won't see that until, I go home later or
And check your
whatever.
computer. Right.
And so I'm like, I've had to tell people over and over again, like, you got to call me using a regular phone. You got to send me a regular text if you want to, and like people will get it eventually. And, I think it's also like that fear missing out. Well, I'm like, well, I missed that phone call. Sorry,
Right.
but I kind of enjoy being a little maybe less available, you know what I mean? Because I think when I was so readily available, it was really like sapping me of my energy and my time and my attention and everything. And now I can look at my group chat at the end of the day with my friends who are scattered all over the country. And cool, I can like catch up. And like, I think I always thought there was an urgency, like, and it's like, well, I don't really need to respond to my friend who lives in Minneapolis like immediately. I'm not meeting her at the coffee shop or whatever. You know what I mean? Like,
Absolutely.
and I think I felt this urgency. And then I realized like my family in Europe is not, we're not like, I can respond to them 6 hours later.
Right.
It's
You're not even in
fine,
the same time zone.
Exactly. And
Right.
so like the urgency kind of is false. Like it's built into the smartphone, and it's actually just like not real.
You mentioned a regular phone call. I was so guilty, and anyone that knows me that's listening to this podcast, I'm admitting something now, which is half the time I was on the phone, I was on speaker and I was scrolling on my phone.
Yes. Oh my God.
And so I wasn't really
Totally.
fully available in a way that I could
Totally.
have been. And now when like my dad lives in Florida, so we don't see each other as much as we'd like. So we catch up on the phone. And now we have real conversations because I'm not also on
Yes. Oh my
Instagram or
gosh.
Reddit or browsing or whatever,
That
right?
is real.
Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely.
I'm guilty of that myself. And I think, I have ADHD and I think the smartphone was really like worsening that for me
Sure.
because, but I think everybody is struggling with that. And for me, was it more of a struggle than other people because I have ADHD? Like, I don't know. But
Mm,
I was very susceptible to like multitasking on the phone and so that's something that I do appreciate about having a phone call and actually just being present during that call, maybe taking a walk because I am like I do want to be doing something or whatever. But yeah, it's great not to have the ability anymore to be in, a million online places at the same time.
Right. It speaks to the power of meaningful connection, whether that's via phone call or a short but intentional text message. And speaking of meaningful connection, as I mentioned, you and I met on Reddit as we were both kind of exploring the world of digital minimalism. And the Scroll Sanity podcast is also on Reddit. Our username is Scroll Sanity, all one word. And we're on a couple of threads already, talking to folks who are interested in either the light phone or some of the other tools that are out there, but also in mindfulness and parenting, as Carmella said at the top of the podcast. So we really encourage folks who are listening and who are on Reddit to get involved. You can message us, comment on our post, reply to our comments. Certainly ask your questions or share your digital minimalism experiences with us. As Carmella said, this podcast is intended to bring experts and fellow folks on the digital minimalism journey together and share our insights, our challenges, our benefits of that experience. So we encourage you to participate to whatever degree you want to. And as I mentioned, it is a twice monthly podcast. We have another episode coming up in a few weeks. So Carmella, do you want to talk a little bit about what's coming up on the next episode?
Sure. I also wanted to add, subscribe to the Substack newsletter, Scroll Sanity, as well.
Absolutely. What was I thinking? Yes, the Scroll Sanity newsletter on Substack. I am a subscriber. It is wonderful. If you're looking to learn more about digital minimalism and specifically Carmella's experience in this space, I love it. I read it every time one comes out. It gets pushed right to your inbox. You can take a look at it there or scroll through the website and see all of the past posts. So highly encourage folks to subscribe to the Scroll Sanity newsletter on Substack.
Thank you. And so, yeah, on our next episode, we are going to be speaking to Jose Briones, who has been on this digital minimalism journey for a really long time. And he's a bit of an expert in the dumb phone world. So it will be great to, speak to him and learn from him. I know that he does dumb phone reviews. And when I told somebody that I had gotten a light phone, she was like, "Oh, do you know Jose Briones on YouTube?" And I was like, "Whoa, like I read his Substack. I didn't realize that he had a thriving YouTube channel and a dumb phone community as well." So that'll be a really interesting conversation. So.
Absolutely. And God, I love a tech reviewer more than anything. So I'm really excited to talk to Jose on the next episode. And we'll certainly keep everybody updated on our journeys with the light phone and all that comes with switching away from the smartphone. So thank you all so much for listening to the very first episode of the Scroll Sanity podcast. As Carmella said, tune in to our next episode when we speak to Jose Briones about his experience in the digital minimalism journey. And again, be sure to subscribe to the Scroll Sanity newsletter on Substack.
Thank you so much, Nick. Have a great one, everyone. See you next time.